Hello and welcome to another EDIS Accounting podcast. Hopefully the quality of this one is up to scratch. I'm trying to get this one out as quick as possible because there's an awful lot of news around coronavirus, COVID-19, and the support available to small businesses, the self-employed, basically you lot, and I want to make sure I can get that as quick as possible. So I did try and do this live. Apparently my YouTube account won't let me do that yet, so I'm going to have to record it and upload it at a lower quality than I normally would, so I don't have to sit and watch it upload for hours and then the news is all old. So without further ado, there are normally three things we like to talk about, but today I'm going to concentrate pretty much exclusively on news and the support available to sole traders, self-employed and small businesses during the current outbreak of COVID-19 and all those measures to limit its spread. And then only very briefly at the end I want to make a reference to a more uplifting note, or more to the point, not an uplifting note by itself, but how you can make something of this situation that we're all finding ourselves in and make something positive out of it. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but mostly it's about the news. And so I do have, much as last time after the budget, a stack of papers. I have a stack of papers here. I want to make sure that I'm getting everything right and giving the best possible information that I can. So the yeah, there's been quite a bit of news, hasn't there? So there's a lot of documents out on gov.uk. That should always be your source for the official help that the government can provide, but they are scattered across various documents which I'm going to try and pull together here into helpful things, helpful collection of information for self-employed small business owners, limited company directors in particular. It's not very clear from this how that applies, but I think we've got a reasonable interpretation of it. So let's go. So it says in this main document, this is COVID-19 support for businesses. Again, I'll link to all of this in the show notes. You can download and view them. They may change. It seems that the support for businesses document is very much a living document. This one will change probably as early as next week as some of the mechanisms for doing these things become clear. The chancellor was at the podium, I guess, alongside the Prime Minister on Wednesday and spoke of a £350 billion package for small businesses scattered across various kinds of support. No doubt you've heard about that, but you don't know necessarily what it means, which is what I'm going to try and help with here. It is not the finished article. This is not all of the help that will come out of the government for small businesses. This is the first thing. What I've taken from it as an overview, as a prelude to some of the detail, what I've taken from this is that the Chancellor's approach seems to be to accept that everyone is going to get affected negatively to some extent, but to ensure that everyone's able to take some of the blow by giving lots of support across business scales, sizes and individuals. There are some holes in that have already been suggested, but then this is a very early stage. They seem to be starting with what's already there, where there are mechanisms. He was speaking at the dispatch box about all of this, or speaking in House of Commons, saying there are lots of mechanisms already in place through which they can help, and they've prioritised that because that's much easier, changing processes in place rather than introducing whole new novel processes. There are some new processes and some new ways of getting funding, but most of it is changes to things that already exist. Now, that does mean that they're relying somewhat that you may already know what exists to help you in a hard scenario as a small business owner or someone who's self-employed. You may well not. So that's why I want to help here. This document, support for businesses, is quite helpful. So I'm just going to go through the sections here. It is outlining the support for businesses who are paying sick pay to employees. I'll talk about that, and I'll talk a little bit about how that might affect you if you are the business, you are the employer, or if you are both the employer and the employee. If you run your own limited company and you are a director, how does this work for you? I think we've worked out how that should be working. Next section here is support for businesses that pay business rates. You may have already seen this, and if you don't have premises, you may be at a loss as to how it's going to help you. It's not. This is not designed to help you. It is designed to help those people with premises. I think that's fairly clear, which suggests that help for businesses without premises is something that needs to happen in the future, in the very short future, as this is certainly not the final collection of help that we can expect from government on this. But there are, of course, the other things that you may fall back on, such as the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme and support for larger firms through COVID-19 corporate financing. I don't think that's really going to apply to many people watching this, so I won't really talk about that. Support for businesses paying tax, that's a key thing, especially if you haven't paid your tax bill from 31st of January yet, and you have the cash to do that but need that cash for other things. Definitely you want to make use of that. The time to pay service, I'll talk about that again in a moment. There's a note here on insurance, well, I think we'll start with that then. So starting with sick pay to employees. So if you are an employer and you have employees, you will probably already be aware that SSP is now payable from day one of an employee being off sick, and that includes if they are self-isolating because a family member is sick or they've come into contact with someone who has been sick and they've been advised to self-isolate. So you will have to pay SSP. It will be reclaimable. So the government will be paying you to pay that statutory sick pay. Now, statutory sick pay is not a vast amount. It's only £94.25 a week, and so the refund will only cover up to 2 weeks, so that's £188.50. So it's better than nothing, and it's something that you can pay employees who are off sick. Of course, you may already have a more generous policy for sickness, in which case do that. But if you don't, you must pay statutory sick pay. You must pay it from day one, and you must pay up to 2 weeks because you will get that money back from the government as well. How to do that is not outlined here. Again, it's assumed that you know how, but maybe you don't. If you run your own small business, you will need to be doing this SSP payment through your payroll company, if you have a payroll company, or your payroll function in your business if you have people doing that. You can't just give them some money. If you are a very small business, maybe you only have employees, we'll get back to this one if you're a limited company as a director taking a salary too, this applies to you. When you pay yourself a salary, you do so through a payroll, which includes systems that link into HMRC and tell them what's going on, how much national insurance is owed, deducting it at source, doing all the POIE, processing SSP payments, among other things. It'll need to go through that same system, and that way HMRC will have everything they need to ensure that you receive that SSP back. They have not said how. So this applies to employers with fewer than 250 employees as of the 28th of February. And you'll be able to reclaim the expenditure for any employee who has claimed SSP as a result of COVID-19. And it just says maintain records. You don't need to ask for a fit note from a GP. And I have seen advice on saying that employees should obtain a fit note rather than from their GP than from NHS 111, but I don't even think that's required. In fact, just pay it and reclaim it. I think it would be unthinkable that the government would be unwilling to pay SSP for those people who are at home due to doing the right thing for COVID-19, just because they did not bother the NHS and their GP for fit notes. That's the concept behind it, and I think you should take that gamble of not bothering the NHS. You don't need to. It certainly says here explicitly employees will not need to provide a GP fit note. I think that also means you don't need anything from NHS 111. But in fact, I'm fairly certain that in the recent daily briefings, Boris Johnson has said that please don't call 111 if you're not actually ill. There's no need. So it would be in line with that to not require that. So the very last bullet point here, the government will work with employers over the coming months to set up the repayment mechanism for employers as soon as possible. So that means that although you will be able to reclaim those costs for delivering SSP to your employees, the mechanism of you getting it back is not obvious. But it is assumed if you have a payroll that you're using the systems that are in place to inform HMRC of all of these things as they happen, and because that's the case, they'll have all the records they need to process those repayments. So the exact mechanism may not be clear, but the source of data should be through those methods. So definitely process SSP through your normal payroll and process it from day one. That's what you need to do. So there was a little extra detail on sick pay because it does depend on what kind of employment you have. Because employees who are full-time employed, this all makes obvious sense, but that's not the only kind of worker in the world and we know it. So agricultural workers have a slightly different scheme. That's a specialism that I don't understand, so I'm afraid you're going to have to refer to someone who does understand how agricultural workers and how that works. I'm afraid I don't know. Casual 0-hour contract and agency workers, you will be treated as employees for this purpose for PAYE tax and Class 1 national insurance contributions, as long as the qualifying conditions are satisfied, which means that you have to be earning more than the lower earnings limit. Now, the lower earnings limit, and this is this case for all SSP, is this is currently £118 a week this March, going up to £120 a week from April in the new tax year. It's that's equivalent to £512 per month, or £520 per month in the coming tax year. That's the lower earnings limit. You may not have any national insurance deductions being made if you earn just over that amount, but you still qualify for the benefits that national insurance brings to you, including statutory sick pay. So that is the important part. Now, in order to measure whether you are earning enough, what is used is something called average weekly earnings. And my understanding of this is that it would normally be something like, I think it's the previous, is it 8 weeks? Something. It's not important because the rules are more or less relaxed in light of COVID. If you are earning enough, basically, of your last pay slip, I would imagine that you should be trying to claim SSP. That would be my understanding of it. Ask your payroll team if you have one, or ask your payroll provider if you're unsure of the detail. But if you have been, certainly if you've been consistently earning more than 118 or 512 per month, 118 per week or 512 per month, then you will be eligible. I anticipate, but can't guarantee, that the so-called periods of incapacity, so let's say you were off sick with something else up until 2 or 3 weeks ago, less than 8 weeks ago, basically. What would normally happen is if you were off ill, say 7 weeks ago, and tried to make a new claim now, the periods of incapacity would be linked, and that might introduce some limits on how much you can claim. I don't anticipate that's going to be the case with COVID. It is clearly unlinked to previous incapacities. There's been no specific news on that, but again, if I were an employer, I would take the gamble that I could reclaim that SSP, do the right thing, and pay it, as if it were a new and novel period of incapacity. I think that would be the right thing to do. It may be a risk, take it under your own advisement, but that would seem in line with the principles that the government is talking about. So what else did I make notes on here in this vast amount of paperwork? For 0-hour workers, contract agency workers, you need to know whether you have had 3 months continuous employment. That's from your first day of work. Was that more than 3 months ago? The first day of actual work. If you have had at least 3 months of continuous employment, then your SSP entitlement continues for the whole of your period of incapacity for work. Of course, that's 2 weeks that can be reclaimed by your employer for COVID, but that you may still be eligible for it after that, depending the whole details of SSP and your employment contract. That's down to you. But that's the case for that. If it's not 3 months continuous employment, then your SSP entitlement would normally continue to the end of any assignment that you've currently agreed to work. So let's say you're on a 0 hours contract, you started it 2 months ago, and you are eligible for SSP because you have had on average a pay higher than £118 per week. and you have a 1 week assignment that you were on in the first day of, then that SSP would be payable for the rest of that time. I would still strongly advise your employer to offer you the full SSP, knowing that they should be able to reclaim it. Should, not definitely, because the original rules would have stated otherwise, but in light of the current situation, I think it becomes politically untenable for too many clauses and conditions to be being applied to SSP. The point of this is that 2 weeks of SSP should be available to every worker, so that every worker can do the right thing. So if you are that employer, I would honour 2 weeks of SSP. And that's what I would do. You make your decision at your own risk. This is the best advice I could possibly give, but you should always take personal advice for your personal situation from whoever you trust for that advice. This is just as I see it as best I can, and I hope it's still helpful nonetheless and can help you make your own decisions according to your own risks that you're willing to undertake. Definitely the government's idea is to support the whole economy and workers with as many ways as possible as necessary throughout this. So 2 weeks of SSP just seems like a no-brainer to me that that's what you should do. And bear in mind it's £180 per employee maximum risk anyway, even if it went wrong, because it's not a vast amount of money, but in this current climate it's still very helpful. What else have we got? Yes, there's an element here to do with directors. This is something I wanted to come on. If you are a limited company, maybe you well, let's see, there's a couple, I suppose. If you're a small business and you're a director of your small business, the question is, do you take a salary? A lot of business owners who are the directors and shareholders of their businesses only take dividends. If that's true, then you don't have a salary that would give national insurance contributions, and therefore you cannot claim statutory sick pay through the limited company and then reclaim it from the government. Instead, you're going to need to rely on employment and support allowance. That's the equivalent for people who don't qualify for SSP. I don't know enough about that yet. I'm going to hope to research that over the rest of today and come back with more information about employment support allowance and how that's going to help you if you don't qualify for SSP. But interestingly, if you are a limited company owner and you do pay yourself a salary above the lower earnings limit, then you should be able to make a claim for statutory sick pay. If you want to avoid the hassle of employment and support allowance, bear in mind that you can set up your payroll for the month and give yourself a salary at just over the lower earnings limit, and then from that very month qualify for SSP through your limited company. Of course, you'll have to wait for the mechanism to be revealed as to how you reclaim that from the government, but you can be sure that it's coming, because it's payable from day one, and the average weekly earnings, it seems that the way that that's calculated, if you've only just begun your engagement, is from the contract begins. So if you are starting to give yourself a salary so that you may have easier access to paying yourself SSP and reclaiming it later from HMRC, then you could set yourself up onto a payroll, pay yourself above £512 for the whole month. If you set yourself up in April, the same trick would need to be £520 per month. But bear in mind, you can pay yourself a salary right up to the secondary national insurance threshold without actually making any national insurance deductions. And the primary threshold is the same for this year and even higher than that for next year. So as an individual, you wouldn't take any national insurance deductions from that either. You could do that, pay yourself that by salary, and many limited companies do. Many limited company contractors or small business owners do pay themselves a salary up to that amount. You can claim SSP from your limited company, assuming you have been continually working, and if you're in control of your own business affairs and you run your payroll for the end of this month, then you will be saying that you have been continually working. Then you will be able to make a claim for SSP if you need it. Of course, you can't just call yourself off sick unless there is the need to self-isolate, which currently the advice for that is if you've been in contact with anyone with COVID-19 or you have any of the new symptoms, which I believe is a high temperature or a new continuous cough. If you have any of those, you're supposed to self-isolate. You can claim SSP. So if you have, if you do set yourself up a payroll, if you own your own limited company, you either are a contractor or you are just a regular small business owner and that entity is limited, and you are a director and you pay yourself dividends only up until now, it would be a good idea to pay yourself some salary above the lower earnings limit so that you can then make a claim for statutory sick pay as an employer to pay to yourself as an employee. But if you haven't set up a payroll before to pay a salary, then you may need some help with that. You'll need to work with someone who can set up a payroll at relatively short order. But the opportunity is there. If you don't take that opportunity and you continue to pay yourself only dividends, of course there is still employment support allowance that is supposed to be there if you don't qualify for statutory sick pay. But I don't know enough about that scheme to talk about it yet, so I'll have to talk about that once I've looked into it in more detail. Right. And I think there's a caveat that the company must have incorporated after the 1st of October 2009 in order for it to be by default that you can decide what remuneration to pay yourself and when. However, I think if it was incorporated before the 1st of October 2009 and you're, say, a sole director, then you would simply have to record your determination that you are paying yourself a salary. But in any case, you would need to be running a payroll, which includes all of those mechanisms to tell HMRC that you're paying PAYE payroll, even if there are no deductions to be made because of the amount that you're paying. So unless you're running a proper payroll and have all of the software in place to inform HMRC, it may be an outsourced arrangement, but nonetheless that's what has to be in place. If you are doing that and you do have a salary above the lower earnings limit, you'll be able to claim statutory sick pay as an employee or director taking a salary of your limited company and reclaim that from HMRC later when the mechanism to do so becomes clear. That's very complicated stuff, but I hope I've made it a little bit clearer. If you are certainly one of our clients, I know we've directed our clients to come and watch this because this is the best way I can present it to a wide audience, then just get in contact directly and we'll help any way we can. Let's see, what else do we have? There's some talk here on mariners who can get SSP if they or their employer have a place of business in the UK, employees with 2 contracts, employees with more than one job with you, employees working outside of the UK on the first day of a period of incapacity for work. This document I'm looking at to refer whether you're eligible for statutory sick pay is a document called Statutory Sick Pay, How Different Employment Types Affect What You Pay. It's a useful document, but as I say, some of its contents may not apply in light of COVID-19 because during this period we're paying from day one, statutory sick pay becomes paid from day one, and I think many of the principles that are supposed to be in place to do with these periods of incapacity for work may not apply. So take a look if you're unsure, but otherwise I hope I've been able to help with a bit more detail on SSP. So there's something to do with employment status that I managed to look up in case you're under the 0 hours or contract or agency work, what your employment status is. You may be aware that the employment status of worker was introduced recently, which means that you may be on a 0 hours contract, but you may still qualify for benefits. Basically, it's a person is generally classed as a worker. I may as well read it, it makes sense. This document is entitled Employment Status Worker. A person is generally classed as a worker if they have a contract or other arrangement to do work or services personally for a reward. Your contract doesn't have to be written. Their reward is for money or a benefit in kind, for example, the promise of a contract or future work. They only have a limited right to send someone else to do the work, subcontract. They have to turn up for work even if they don't want to. Their employer has to have work for them to do as long as the contract or arrangement lasts. They aren't doing the work as part of their own limited company in an arrangement where the employer is actually a customer or client. So that last one is worker status basically doesn't count if you're a limited company contractor. Instead, your limited company is your employer. You're going to have to look to those SSP mechanisms that I spoke about earlier, or ESA, employment support allowance as a backup if you don't qualify for SSP for whatever reason. So workers are entitled to certain employment rights, including getting the national minimum wage, protection against unlawful deductions from wages, so on and so forth. They may also be entitled to statutory sick pay. And the may, I think here is just referring to whether you've made enough money in your average weekly earnings. For example, have you made more than £118 per week? So yeah, that's basically how that works if you're wondering whether that qualifies you as a 0 hours worker or not to claim statutory sick pay. But of course, if you are a 0 hours worker, the first people to talk to are your employer, and they should be able to tell you whether you can claim. And if you cannot claim and you believe you should, then I don't really know what your recourse is. I would perhaps start with Citizens Advice Bureau, perhaps write to them, perhaps write to your MP. It's a time when people should be trying to do the right thing. But if you earn less than £118 per week, and maybe for that reason you don't qualify for statutory sick pay, do have a look at employment support allowance. But I do need to look into that further before I can give any more advice on that one. Right. What's next? Guidance for employers and businesses on coronavirus, COVID-19. So I think we're now into some more general items here, but there's some things to do with SSP here. If you're an employer, is making explicit those who follow advice to stay at home and who cannot work as a result will be eligible for statutory sick pay, even if they are not themselves sick. So if you're under any doubt, it's in the documentation. And I think that's basically the only main thing of value here. But if you are an employer, do check out that document, Guidance for Employers and Businesses on Coronavirus COVID-19. It is mostly, the heading titles are what to do if someone develops symptoms, so I basically send them home, right, and make sure they're looked after, travel arrangements, sick pay, certifying absence from work. By law, medical evidence is not required for the first 7 days of sickness. After 7 days, employers may use their discretion, and this is what I talked about earlier about not needing a sick note or something from 111. You see this guidance here to employers says we strongly suggest that employers use their discretion around the need for medical evidence for a period of absence where an employee is advised to stay at home either as they are unwell themselves or live with someone who is, in accordance with the public health advice issued by the government. I think they're making that very clear that if you're following the advice to stay home, please use your discretion and offer SSP, especially with lights that you can reclaim it. I think would make sense. Another element on limiting the spread of coronavirus in businesses and workplace, which is just that good advice of washing your hands and cleaning, disinfecting objects and so on and so forth. Do take a look if you're unsure about any of that. Right. That is most of those documents. There's so many to go through. I do understand how complicated it is as a small business to try and understand what help is available to you. There is an awful lot. I'm at risk of messing my papers up and making it even harder for me to help. So let me go back to this main first one here, the support for businesses. We've gone right into statutory sick pay and right back out again. I hope I've managed to help make that clear whether you have to pay statutory sick pay to your employees or whether you can pay statutory sick pay to yourself if you're a limited company director. And for the self-employed, who are not limited companies, then SSP is not your mechanism. You need to be looking at employment and support allowance. And I'll come back in a future video with a bit more detail about that. There isn't an awful lot here talking about it. I think everyone who is trying to help, both in government and in the wider industry, are going as quick as they can. In particular, local government are going to have to come on quick with a lot of new responsibilities. They're only hearing about that tomorrow, in fact, in written detail. It says here under this under the part to do with support for businesses that pay business rates. Obviously business rates are something dealt with at local government level, local authority level. It says guidance for local authorities on the business rates holiday will be published by 20th of March. So they're receiving funding and guidance on how to distribute it basically as we speak. So you may refer to your local authority, and it may be tricky for them to deal with your query straight away. But still, of course, if you need something, you must ask for it. So the support for businesses that pay business rates, this next section of that document to do with support for businesses during COVID-19, there is a business rates retail holiday for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses in England for the 2020-2021 tax year. So that's great if you have business rates as a cost. That will not be there for you. There is a £25,000 grant to be provided to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses operating from smaller premises with a rateable value between 15,000 and 51,000. So if that affects you, if that's an offer for you, that's a grant. You should figure out how to apply for that and apply for it. The inquiries would have to go to the local authority, and there's that line where they don't really know how they're going to do that. They don't have any guidance for it until tomorrow anyway, but that's who you'd need to apply to for those reliefs against business rates. There's also a section here that is support for businesses that pay little or no business rates. The context here is still to do with property. So if you still have the relevant kind of premises that have rates, but you happen to pay little or no business rates, the government will provide additional funding for local authorities to support small businesses that already pay little or no business rates. Because of small business rate relief, this will provide a one-off grant of £10,000 to businesses currently eligible for small business rate relief or rural rate relief to help meet their ongoing business costs. So part of the approach from government seems to be reducing in the costs that are a burden to small businesses, but there are some grants in here as well. It hasn't extended beyond this. So if you don't have premises, like many small businesses don't have premises, then none of this stuff to do with business rates is particularly helpful, and it's not been missed. So I'll go through these other items and I'll talk a little bit about how the chancellor handled an awful lot of questions from MPs in the Commons just afterwards on Wednesday. The next element here is support for businesses through the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. A new temporary coronavirus business interruption loan scheme delivered by the British Business Bank will launch next week to support primarily small and medium-sized businesses to access bank lending and overdrafts. So this is loans, not grants. This isn't money for free. This is to help you through hardship, but you'll have to pay it back later. It's worth bearing in mind that hopefully there will. I really hope that what happens next is that more cash grants become available, because I know the concept is that if everyone is hurt a little bit, then the system doesn't fail and we don't have a giant crash. That's great that we don't have a giant crash, but it does mean that some of these first ways to help are explicitly you taking the pain. So taking a loan means you're still going to take the pain of reduced business, and later when business is healthy again, you'll be able to repay what got you through that painful period. But hopefully there will be some actual no strings attached cash to come in at some point. But for now, for this interruption loan scheme, the government will provide lenders with a guarantee of 80% on each loan. That means that it should be easier to get that loan as a business, subject to a per lender cap on claims, so that they can have further confidence in providing finance to SMEs. But what we don't know yet is what that means if you're going to walk into a branch of one of these business banks and say, I want a loan, a business interruption loan, what are they actually going to ask for? So the details are light at the moment as to how that's going to work. The scheme will support loans of up to £5 million in value. Businesses can access the first 6 months of that finance interest-free, as government will cover the first 6 months of interest payments. But I notice there's nothing here stating what interest rates should be. So I do hope that, like I had heard one MP in the House of Commons suggesting that someone in her constituency had walked into HSBC and asked about this interruption loan and were quoted an 18.9% APR on a loan, which would have been quite a considerable loan, and basically she deemed that was not a particularly helpful scenario. Even if that interest isn't payable for the first 6 months, it could still be a debt that you can't afford to take on. Also, it's been raised that may be somewhat prejudicial to existing creditors. So there is chatter among MPs that this may not be good enough, and we'll need more. And certainly, I hope that we will have more. The scheme will be available from early week commencing 23rd of March. I hope that means you can walk into a bank on Monday and see if there's something available to you. And I think that's what you should take as the message here. This afternoon we should have another address by the Prime Minister. I think these are now happening between 4 p.m, 5 p.m. But we knew in advance that the Chancellor would be speaking on Wednesday. I haven't heard anything similar today, so it could well be that we're talking more about the current status of the spread and how we're dealing with the medical issues like we did yesterday, in fact. So there may not be much on the finances. However, a lot of the questions are still very much pointedly on what is the actual help, where can we get it, when can we get it, which of course is what I want to tell you, but can't in many of these situations. There is an element here, support for larger firms through the COVID-19 corporate financing facility, but if you're a larger firm, you probably have access to better specific advice to you than I can give, but it does say here that will be only available in the week commencing 23rd of March. Support for business paying taxes is a key one I really want to come back to. I mentioned it earlier. If you are currently owing a tax bill and you're being chased for that money from 31st of January, for example, but you haven't yet paid, maybe that cash might be better put to use to seeing you through this hard time. Get in contact with HMRC's Time to Pay service. They have laid on, I think it's 2,000 more workers to field the calls and to help businesses not pay tax when they need the cash that they have for tax to get through the issues due to COVID-19. If you're concerned about being able to pay your tax due to COVID-19, call HMRC's dedicated helpline on 0800 0159 559. 0800 0159 559. Give them a call if you owe HMRC money, and that money would go to better use seeing you through this current situation. That's what it's there for. There's a last thing here to do with insurance. Businesses that have cover for both pandemics and government-ordered closure should be covered. Basically, this is answering the frustration that many had that because the government had asked the public to avoid pubs, theatres, etc., that wasn't the same as closure. Now the government and the insurance industry have confirmed that should constitute as a government-ordered closure, and so if you are covered for both pandemics and government-ordered closure, you should now be able to claim on your insurance. Many people won't be covered for those things anyway, so I think this is a case of ensuring that the things are currently here. As I said before, the Chancellor seems to be making sure that current systems are bolstered before introducing new and novel things. So a lot of this first stuff is making sure that existing things work better, and hopefully we'll see more added on top. And I think that is basically the full detail that I've managed to take out from gov.uk on all of these items. This is quite an extreme time for running a small business, for being a sole trader, for being self-employed. Definitely remember most from all of this which things that you heard that seemed applicable to you. I know that for nearly everybody involved, there'll be some element of relying on SSP if and when you must self-isolate. Remember, it's March, there are colds going around that are not COVID-19, but if you get those symptoms of a high temperature or a new continuous cough, you will have to self-isolate. In fact, police, I understand now, have been given powers to detain those who are not self-isolating when they should be, but I think they actually have to have COVID-19, but still, it's the rules have been introduced on the basis that you should do it, and I think they'll become more and more enforced. So if you must take time off, take SSP. If you still have to do work for your own small business while you're under SSP, I think, again, this is at your own risk, the concept of SSP is that if you do any work, you're no longer eligible for sick pay. I think in this political climate, that a government could punish people who manage to continue to scrape their businesses through during self-isolation and were thus denied help through either employment support allowance or SSP, I think that would be politically untenable. So I would say still claim SSP, even if occasionally you can log in to do your emails or do some social media posts or whatever you can do at home in self-isolation. Obviously, if your business already works with you at home, it would be somewhat taken the mick if you then claimed SSP on top, but still claim everything you can. After all, if they come to claim it back 6 months later and everything's fine again, finding 180 quid that you got for SSP from somewhere may not be a big issue. So take the risks that are reasonable for you according to your wishes, but I would suggest that use that support that's available to you as much as you need. That is why it's there. Let's see, I think I'm coming to the end of all of this, which you'll be glad to hear, but we're certainly not coming to the end of the effects due to COVID-19. There is, it's unclear to me what will happen if you happen to live in an area that is put on lockdown. That isn't something that's being talked about much as a serious inevitability currently. But as with all of the significant measures that have taken place, they seem to leak out as rumours, and then people seem to prepare for the potential of children being sent home from school, for example, and then we finally get confirmation that it will happen. We may be on the same trajectory for lockdowns in some places, maybe only London, because I've seen some pretty shocking images of people in London still all over the tubes and still going in pubs and clubs. In fact, one of the questioners at the Prime Minister's address yesterday essentially called for it, as it suggested that perhaps that's a almost immoral thing to be doing if you're living in London, still going out and making such crazy high levels of social contact when there is a pandemic flowing through the country. So we may see some enforcement such as a lockdown. Will that be considered equivalent to self-isolation for SSP? I don't know, possibly not. Possibly there'll be other mechanisms in place long before that happens. Hopefully we'll hear more about those. As soon as I do hear anything about other mechanisms for self-employed, small businesses, business owners to gain some extra support, I will certainly let you know. There were only a few other things I wanted to say. That's right. What the things that I'm missing? So yes, I mentioned I wanted to talk about the questions that were asked of the Chancellor when he returned to the House of Commons on Wednesday. I tuned in and watched or listened to quite a lot of that. I'm eating my evening meal, listening to a barrage of questions to the Chancellor. The vast majority of them were about when and how will small businesses get money? When and how can they access this massive amount of cash? Why is it in the form of loans when the businesses cannot reasonably take on debt if they think they may not even survive through the crisis, or perhaps they went into the crisis already low on cash flow due to some other regular business issue that happened? So those questions are being asked, and not being asked once or twice, not murmurs. It is a barrage. These are almost all of the questions were to do with more help for the self-employed, more help for small businesses, more help for 0 hours workers, more help for other businesses who weren't identified in that first tranche of retail, hospitality, leisure, and the rates and grants that are being made available to those. There were questions of, well, what about the businesses in the supply chain to those sectors? If you are supplying people who run events, and your orders have fallen off the cliff, what do you get? And the answer is unknown. The answer that was given, I think, by the Chancellor was along the lines of, for now, you should recourse to what's available through employment support allowance, universal tax credits. Bear in mind, as I said last time, if you do claim universal tax credits, at the moment there is no minimum income floor. So if you are self-employed more than a year but not earning as much as the minimum wage, when the minimum income floor is in effect, your universal tax credit claim is processed as if you were earning the minimum wage, presumably attributing your low income as a lifestyle choice rather than a necessity. But that's how that would have worked only during this. there is no minimum income floor. So if this is your second or third year of self-employment, but you don't make as much as, say, 35 hours on the minimum wage, you still can claim universal tax credit, and they'll process it at the actual rate of earnings that you have. So don't forget about that. Universal tax credit, employment support allowance, and SSP, probably the things that most of us will have to rely on at some point over the coming months or so. The other item which wasn't talked about much and has attracted perhaps a slightly mistaken optimism is the IR35 changes that were going to come in have been delayed. If you haven't heard me talk about this before, it is essentially stating that those people who are working as a contractor through a limited company but are actually disguised employees, they should be paying their PAYE level of taxes and national insurance. Essentially, that's what the whole point of that legislation is. It's been coming for more than a decade. That has been pretty ineffective when HMRC have to go after every single limited company to figure out if it's a so-called personal service company and if this legislation applies. So they shifted the liability in the public sector over a year ago, so that if an NHS trust employs someone through a limited company contract and it turns out that that's disguised employment, then that NHS trust is liable for the PAYE tax that they should have paid. Change was also due to happen in the private sector this April. It caused some employers to stop engaging limited company contractors at all, and that's obviously quite a big problem. That's an unnecessary shock to the system, and that's why that's not going to happen now, so that large employers who would have been liable for those costs can continue to engage limited company contractors knowing they have no new liabilities throughout this tax year. But it's not a massive benefit to the contractors, because the contractors are still liable, that means, for the POI tax if HMRC come back later and say that you should have been inside IR35. But in the terms of the grand scale of problems compared to COVID-19, having to pay a little bit more tax because you were really a disguised employee is not really up there. So continuation of employment and contract availability is going to be much more of an important thing. So that's why they've delayed that. But yeah, the optimism isn't that warranted, because it does mean that regardless, you're still liable if you're not paying the proper taxes according to HMRC's rules, IR35. If that doesn't apply to you, that was incredibly boring, but it's one of the changes. So your sector that you work in may have been unaddressed with the current changes that you've seen, the current offerings from the Chancellor to help small business. If that's the case, he was suggesting he's in contact with all of the ministers of their regions to try and get real ideas as to how they could help with now new novel ways of helping. So, for example, talking to the Transport Secretary to see how he can help with the transport sector, as that will have massive changes to it amid COVID-19. If your sector's been not well represented so far, really your only option is to write to your MP and hope that during this consultation that's going on between MPs at the moment, it would be a good time to do that. I don't mean get out the pen and paper. You can go to writetothem.com and do an email, that's fine. Do it, it might help. It will take you 5 minutes to convey your fear and belief that you're unsupported, but maybe also suggest a way you could be supported. You never know, you might find that your idea is something that gets told to the right person at the right time when they are listening. It is important to ask when they are listening. They are listening right now. It's a good time to ask. Which brings me on to the last point, which is a little bit more uplifting, which is this is a big bad thing, COVID-19, but there are opportunities that come as a result of this. There's an old phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's not the nicest of phrases, but a bad thing's happening. That doesn't mean that you have to ignore all the positive outcomes that could happen as a result of it. So, for example, my wife is a personal trainer. Now, her face-to-face contact has gone down massively, so she's had to stop classes, and she's only seeing PT clients that are, really super comfortable at coming, and that's not all of them. Some of them are already self-isolating. So that is a big change to the business, but we have previously done, I have this recording set up, and we have previously recorded online videos, and now we're moving to that. It's something that we did previously, and it's something that I'm helping with now. It's a new business opportunity that has been considered before, not massively urgent, and now there's a real motivation to do it. You may have similar moments of clarity when you aren't feeling stressed about what will happen negatively as a cause of this change in the world going on around us. If you can spend a little time thinking positively about what new opportunities it may bring, you may find that there are new areas for your business to grow into that you hadn't considered before that could work really well. This could help remote classes really get off the ground for my wife, and they could become successful. So especially during this time when people are going to be self-isolating and going stir crazy in their houses, helping them keep fit at home is actually going to have a higher demand than her current client base, so she may get new future customers. And certainly from my perspective, the least thing I think you can do if you have marketing activity that strengthens your brand is to continue that. Keep your brand strong, keep talking to your customers, keep looking after your employees, keep seen, keep positive, and be genuinely helpful at a time when everyone really needs help. And I think your business has every chance of being healthy on the other side of this if people see that you are someone that they want to do business with. And I think that's important. So the last thing I wanted to end on was that it's not all bad. A few podcasts ago, I talked about when you manage risks and issues, you should also keep an eye out for opportunities. And this is one of those times. Keep an eye out for where that opportunity may be for you to do something you hadn't thought of before, but is becoming more necessary or more marketable as people's livelihoods are changing and people's behaviours are changing. Certainly, I hope you've found this useful. Some of the things that I've talked about today, I will continue to give more information as I can bring it from all these multiple documents as they get updated with what's going on, what support there is for small business. I'll be keeping in touch if you're a client of ours and you're watching this because we directed it to you. This represents our pretty much full understanding of the new measures available to us, because there is limited understanding of the new measures available, but hopefully this is some help, and as we know specific things that may be applicable to you, we'll reach out directly and let you know. And one of the other items this was brought up, there's accounting web is something we rely on quite a lot. They have wonderful articles for accountants to look through. One of them reminds you that if you are sitting on a cash pile and you are not using it for the good of continuing your relationship with your employees, let's say that's handled for whatever reason, not every industry is affected the same by COVID, some are affected differently. If you happen to be on a cash pile, there's going to be some bargains, there's going to be some things you'll be able to pick up for cheap. Maybe not now, maybe within a few weeks, maybe in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, months' time. You can make massive investments. And certainly as we come out of this, all businesses should be poised for growth again. First, get through it. Second, be ready to capitalise on opportunities that'll happen now. And thirdly, be ready to grow when it's done, because it will be done, it will be over, and there will be opportunities to grow your business like there were 2 months ago when we weren't talking about COVID-19. So, do remember that. Another useful point here is to consider your supply chain. It might be useful to talk to some of your suppliers and to some of the people that you supply, and just to touch base and to see how everyone's reacting to COVID-19. Now's the time for lots of good communication. If you want a good, strong network of business to continue, communicate with those people you do business with really well, and let them know really honestly how you think business for you is going to pan out over the coming months, and they can let you know really honestly, I would hope, how their business is going to pan out, and you can be much better prepared for what they think will happen. Do try and resist the urge to delay making payments. Late payments doesn't really help anyone in this system. Especially the broad economic issue is money needs to keep flowing. It may need to find new routes when some money just doesn't flow in certain directions, but please don't take this as an opportunity to not pay your suppliers. If you're a small business, I'm sure you already know the pain of not being paid in a timely way, so please don't be one of those as well. I think that's really it. Mortgage payments. That was the other thing that came up. There are mortgage holidays that have been agreed with the chancellor, which will affect anyone who's a homeowner, and there are conversations about making sure that no one can be evicted if you're a renter. So these are two of the major concerns of people who have a massive disruption to their income. So I know that RBS, Lloyds Bank and Barclays have agreed that they will be mortgage holidays available, and I'm sure that there will be more to come for renters, as that was another big topic discussed and mentioned to the Chancellor of the Exchequer when he was back in the House of Commons. Lots of MPs talking about renters along with the self-employed, 0 hours contracts and the low paid, and what help will be available to them. So if help wasn't clear for you currently, fingers crossed, more clarity over what help will become available to you should come over the coming days, hopefully tomorrow, at least over the coming week. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Bye.